So, we'll start off with this, and then we'll kind of take a step back and say, how do we apply something like this in an organization, right? So, there's, name your number of steps you want to use. We'll call it 5 steps, but 5 steps to do a project risk analysis. And effectively what we're trying to do is the same things that Nathan walked through is, do we have a good schedule? Can we validate that schedule? Building that model, a variety of different techniques and tools and tips we can use to build that model to actually reflect what we're trying to communicate or explore and understand about that. Do the analysis. Once we get the analysis, there has to be some iteration on that to better understand what we're trying to do. What do the results mean? How did the model react? How did the schedule react? And what can we learn from that? And then we go back out and we'll iterate through that a few times, right? Walk through different scenarios, walk through different objectives to make sure we're meeting those, and then reporting those out. All right. What I'd actually like to do is begin with the end in mind. What does that reporting look like? How can we communicate this out? And we can see that ConocoPhillips, over the years, has developed a very strong methodology, a strong process, a level of robustness around their reporting techniques, and they've gotten organizational buy-in around that. One of the things we were inspired by seeing that and some of the other customers we've been working with is trying to think about how can we elevate the way we communicate risk out to the organization, and how can we help you facilitate that? How can we help provide a solution that helps do that? So imagine as part of your project dashboard, you have the ability to include risk information, right? Ordinarily this information has been trapped in a tool. What if we're able to pull that information out and include it as part of a risk dashboard, right? So for instance, what if we're able to begin to capture some indicators about our overall risk profile? How are our schedule and cost trending for this particular project from a risk point of view, right? We have schedule baselines and we track performance against those. What about tracking performance against our risk baseline or our risk view of our schedule? What if we're able to pull out some of these top risk, and to Nathan's point, one of the items on his wish list is how do we actually quantify that? How do we quantify the contribution of that risk to our schedule and cost, right? What if we're able to do that? I mean, it sounds kind of far-fetched at this point because we've never been able to do that before, all right? So if we were to drill in, what if we're able to get actually the complete list, or the top 5, right? A series of saying like, hey, give me some key insights into what's going on in my project so I can better understand, what's driving that overall trend in my project and what I can do about that. So now I want to understand, well, I see this trend, this is worrisome, let me go investigate that. What if I'm able to get a view of this project risk trend over time, right? So I've captured this data, I'm tracking my, pick whatever p-values you want, we're showing p20 and p80. What if I'm able to track that over time and I can see here, yep, something happened here towards the end. What I can see is it's probably schedule driven. I've made some significant schedule changes that pushed out my date, but it also drove out my P80 and my P20, right? It's kind of a different way to look at this as my risk profile over time. What we want to see is something that does this over time as well too, right? As I execute my project and I come closer towards completion, I hope to see convergence around those 3 points, right? As we remove the uncertainty from our analysis, the uncertainty from our project, we should be driving that out. It's a way we can validate, are we managing contingency, are we managing our project effectively, right? So going back and looking at this, I'm at a different role in the organization. Maybe I'm a global risk manager, or I'm part of that risk management group, and I see that I've got this top risk in this project, and I'm like, well, I know that's one of those global risks that we're concerned about, right? Obviously, there's still markets where there's still labor shortages, and it's like, well, we've identified that as a risk to our organization. What does that look like across the board? So if I were to drill in there, now I've got the ability to look at our organizational assessment of what we thought that would do from an impact point of view, but then across projects, what are their individual assessments, right? Are they less or more risky than that? What is their exposure? What is their quantified impact? And then what's the overall quantified impact to my organization as well too, right? It's a way that I can get that next level of depth of information about my risk from my organization. Today you may be using a qualitative risk register. It's great to kind of have the high, medium, and low probability of impact. You can do a high-level assessment using value at risk. Multiply your probability by your exposure. It's great, but it's still kind of a swag, right? We still don't really know what that really means. But here, if I'm able to draw this out from analysis, I've got much more meaningful, much more insightful results that I can use to drive some decision making. All right. So we get our overall view. And so where does that come from? How do we do that? Well, let's go and we'll take a look about how we're able to drive that using Safran Risk today and drive some of that insight into the project.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yep.
If you don't mind, can you go back to the trending chart?
Yeah. Let's go back.
Okay, so the next one.
Mm-hmm.
Is that out of your product, the gray bars, or did you just draw that in?
So we've drawn this. So this is kind of the information that we're today beginning to capture and store, right? So one of the things that differentiates us already is that we have a database behind the scenes, right? So we're no longer file-based, right? What we're working towards is being able to save off the information over time and save it over as you trend it. So plotting this out will be easy. This would be forecasting. What this has really been illustrated is like what you would expect to see as the project nears completion. But the ability to forecast that, I think ultimately depends on the project.
Well, I guess, so I've left half the color, you know,
Yep.
really see that and see the value in that, but it'd be great if you could take the right and run the simulation where each risk has a month that you expect that risk to occur at this point in time, and it goes away, so you start to get that, so you could forecast what it potentially could look like going forward would be great.
Yeah.
If you could do that or not.
So not today, but it's something we've been looking at, and we've got the elements of a lot of that. And I think you'll see somehow the pieces of how we can actually, while we may not be able to do it automatically for you, we can enable you to do that yourself and show some of these ways to go about building that out. Okay, so Safran risk, and I apologize, I'll be up and down a little bit here. So one of the things you'll notice as we get started, right? So I opened it up to the schedule tab. If you notice across the top, I have a series of tabs here. I'll be effectively walking left to right as we go through them, but the way we've designed the application, so one of the things we did as we came back and doing this was saying, how do we enable the project teams and the risk teams to focus more on the process and less about the tool? I ran PertMaster services for several years through PertMaster Primavera and the Oracle acquisition, worked with lots of customers, lots of you guys, they've either trained or done risk analysis workshops with you and your organizations. Constant feedback we got is, tool's sophisticated, but overwhelmingly so, right? And so one of the things we came back in to do was to strip it back to the core functionality. Leave the power there, but really simplify the interface and the approach to enable the users to focus on what they're doing, to enable people like Nathan and his team to actually put the product up in front of organizations and say, here it is, and people not get lost in kind of what's going on. So inputs are here on the left, analysis in the middle, and all my outputs are on the right. Right? So we've already laid out a very linear process. It's adaptable to however many steps process you want to use, but it clearly organizes the product in a way that's like, yep, I get it. I start over here, I finish over here, and the keystone is right there in the middle. So we've built Safran Risk around Safran Project. All right? So if you're not familiar with that, Safran Project's been around for over 20 years. We like to say we're big in Europe, kind of like David Hasselhoff, I guess. Let's
get into analogy.
But no, we've been around, major player in the oil and gas industry in Norway. I mean, I think there's not a company in Norway that doesn't run us if you're involved in oil and gas. So strong there, all the, the majors in Norway, a lot of the contractors, and we actually have companies here in the US that use us on contracts over there as well. What we saw is there's been a shift in the market, an opportunity to bring over not only Safran Project, but also kind of reinvigorate the risk analysis market as well too, right? And timing is everything, and we've been working on this, and then oil prices sank, and there's been kind of renewed interest in that market as well too. So what we wanted to do is say, wait, we have a great scheduling tool, and so you can see that embedded here, right? So, as I'm mentally walking through Nathan's list, I've got the scheduling tool covered, right? Powerful scheduling tool with 20 years of experience backed behind it, wrapped in a very lightweight, easy to use, intuitive interface around that from a risk perspective, right? So you can do with it what you want. You can import Microsoft Project, Primavera, variety of different schedule formats. We can round trip, so to the point of I'm coming in here and I'm making changes to my schedule based on my risk analysis, and I want to send that back to my project team. I can do that as well too, right? So I brought in my schedule. Now, a little bit about this schedule. So we have a model. This is kind of more of a model than it is a schedule. And I only clarify that because we'll see some things in terms of how we modeled the cost. So in this case, to Nathan's point about a way to flexibly model cost, in this one, it's a few hundred activities, and we've actually got, so if I scroll down to the bottom here, we've actually got separate structure to capture all the costs using some hammocks. Right, so as we run the analysis and do some things, we'll see the hammocks will pick up and we'll run some costs that way. So again, Ideally, you've got a resource-loaded schedule. Depending on where you are in your project lifecycle, you may not have that. So what are the tools you've got at your disposal? I can create high-level resources here and use those. I can create hammock activities and leverage those. So again, a variety of techniques depends on what your approach, what you want to do as you build your model. Schedule warning. The schedule quality check. And again, the point here is to say, do we have a quality schedule? We need to have a dynamic, flexible schedule to actually kind of truly model the dynamic nature of the risk. So we've got the key checks here. You can see here we're flagging a bunch of lags. That's kind of an artifact of just the way we've got lags on activities to pick up the hammock activities. If I remove some of those, we get down to some of the key activities here. So my open ends, etc. We have the ability, if you want, you can write notes about why that constraint is there. So if you have a constraint and you've got something, I can accept it, which says, yeah, I know about it. Don't bother me next time I import a schedule about it, right? We'll hide it. We can only look at just the open items, right? So in this particular case here, you can put some notes in, some comments about, oh yes, that constraint represents this, right? So again, helping to enable the process over time, capture and document information about what the process is you're going through, right? So from there, we begin to get into building out our risk. And one of the other key things that we've done differently as we approach this was we decided that every risk had to go in the risk register, regardless of what kind of risk it was. So other tools, you've got uncertainty over here on the activity, you've got your risk events here, you've got your weather modeling over here, you've got your factors over here, you've got 4 or 5 different places you're trying to model stuff. One, did you capture everything? If so, how did you do it? Where is it? Where's that comprehensive list that gives you visibility into what you've modeled for your risk perspective? 2, if I capture it here, it's got clear visibility into what we're doing, and I've got it captured here and I can report on it later. If I don't capture it here, I can't report on it, right? You lose a lot of that visibility in those other techniques because they're just not designed to pull that information in, right? So if you've got a risk and you define it here, it's there. Now the question, you're like, well, wait, this whole uncertainty thing, how did you model uncertainty in a risk register? So we've purposely left behind the qualitative aspect of this, right? We're focused on quantitative. That helps focus it a little bit more, helps us really, again, strip down to just the core basics. There's ways you can import and copy and paste and get those risk in. To Nathan's point, sometimes you have to translate. A risk in your qualitative risk register may actually be multiple ways you have to model that to model that quantitatively. So what we've done, and I'm going to sort on probability just to highlight all of these right here that say 100%. Yep.
So if I hear you correctly, you're not trying to make the risk module or risk register within this tool function as the project's risk register.
Correct. There are better tools for that. In-house or off the shelf.
And importing and exporting changes back and forth?
Those are, depending on what the tool is, that's what we're working towards as well, right? We've got some ideas on some of the key ones that we have. What we found is there's no standard, and so that makes it tricky. So we're looking at some ways to make it as easy as possible to do that. Now, so if we kind of think about the different types of risk, the way we model them historically, right? So I'll kind of hopefully use some terms that we all make sense. And by the way, so this is kind of a good point. How many have used or are doing risk analysis today within your organization? Good, that's probably why you're here. And the second would be is what tools are being used? Anybody not using PertMaster? Okay. Every once in a while, so there's other we've run into. There's a few other tools in the market we've run into as well. PertMaster seems to kind of be the de facto standard, so that's good. So you're probably all familiar with some of the terminology. Hopefully, I'll try to bridge kind of the old approach with the new approach, and say kind of, hey, here's where we think the market's going and where we think the future risk analysis is, right? So by capturing all of my uncertainty here. Right? One of the challenges of capturing uncertainty at the activity level or using templated quick risk or applying it that way is I don't know what it represents. Right? I lose track of it. Here I can easily go in and you can see in this model we've defined a series of uncertainty. right? I've got multiple different levels of uncertainty that I can apply to the activities. I can apply them to overlapping activities, right? So I may have an activity where I say, well, there's contractor uncertainty because I don't know who this contractor is first time we've used them. I've got general labor market uncertainty. I can begin to stack up those different uncertainty factors, those risk factors against the activity, right? To really tease out some of the detail that before got lost, right? Whereas before I just had to put one big range on it. Now I can break that into more specific, quantifiable, discrete risk impacts and risks that I want to capture, right? From a modeling perspective, I've got great flexibility, right? So if I highlight this one, we have the ability to capture schedule and cost impact, right? We're not limited to only schedule and cost risk. I can capture any type of risk I want. It may be a quality risk, right? But what I really want to capture here is, for that quality risk, what is the schedule and cost impact? So if it doesn't pass QC or the testing, right, then I know I've got to have delays in my schedule and overhead costs to go back and fix that problem, right? That's what we want to capture here. So I can capture schedule and cost. The impact types, this is where we've changed, right? We capture relative impacts, which you can see here are percentage based, right? So this is allowing me to scale the duration of the activity. The uncertainty in this one, right, one of the key challenges we had, it's always been a challenge, is how do I model an opportunity? Or how do I model a risk that's an opportunity and a risk, right? Because everything's not cut and dry, it's not black and white. I've got it covered here, right? 90%, I'm gonna scale back my duration by 10%, or I'm gonna scale it up 20% during the analysis, right? I've inherently captured that spread, and I can capture opportunities that way, right? I don't have to have a positive greater than 100%. I could have this scale back at 40 to 100%. I could say what's actually in my schedule is my max. I'm going to scale it back and say I could cut half that duration off, right? So having that relative impact type gives me ultimate flexibility in how to manipulate that duration to represent the risk or the opportunity I want to capture. From a distribution perspective, again, our approach, focus on the high value, leave the noise behind, right? So we've captured the key distributions we found customers were using, right? I'd say probably 95%, no one ever used anything different than triangle, trigen, or uniform, right? Those are the most common ones we've seen. If you've got more data and you're more sophisticated, you've got cumulative and discrete to go and build your own as well, right? So you can build your own distributions if you've got the data. We've got some customers that, you know, in the case, I'll put words in Nathan's mouth here about Conoco, but you have historical data. You might be able to go back and mine some of that data and say, I'm going to build my own curve to kind of, you know, do best practices and use historical data. I can do that with my cumulative distribution, right? Questions so far about what we're doing, how our approach is?
Those risks, are they distinct events, or it's a mix of events and uncertainty that gets layered over,
yes,
over a group of activities?
Exactly that, right? And so one thing to point out here is when I model the uncertainty, so behind the scenes, right, I create a risk factor, 100% probability with some, you know, range of some range on the side. By default, we correlate all the impacts of that. So I take that one risk and I apply it against 5 activities. It'll impact all 5 of those activities the same, right? This helps us later when you get into applying and you want to do, maybe you don't have the luxury of building a new whole summary schedule. You've got to deal with the schedule you've been given, right? I can apply a distribution at a high level and it correlates all down through the activities to avoid the impacts of central limit theorem, right? Kind of a common problem we've had in the past. We get rid of it with risk factors, right? It's natively built into the application the way we built it. We design it from the ground up to avoid issues like that, right? Maybe in my mind, I know I've got transportation uncertainty, but I want to reuse that across a couple of different transportation activities that aren't related, right? It's the general uncertainty around transportation and shipping things halfway around the world, but I've got different contractors and different things going on. So they're not really related, but I want to kind of capture that general risk. I can break up the way we model that by saying impact the activities independently. What that means is I take one risk, I model it against 5 activities. If I say impact independently, it'll impact sets of those activities differently. It won't impact all 5 of them at the same time. It'll impact 1 here, 2 here. It'll mix it up, right? So it actually breaks the correlation there to, you know, again, give you the way to model that more realistically. The goal is to allow you to simplify the number of risks you have to capture, consolidate, keep it in one place, make it manageable, but give you the ultimate flexibility, tools, and controls you need to build the model the way you want to build it, right? We're just trying to enable you in your process.
Yeah, I was just curious on the model development. I find that the risk workshops I've been conducting, people seem to relate better to a network diagram. Is that flexibility in your product as well? Instead of a Gantt view, the network?
It is in our core product. I need to think, so what we've done with the schedule product we've got here, we took our core and we boiled it down to a kind of a lesser set. I need to see if we left that in or not, so I'll have to check on that.
Okay.
There's some alternate views we do have. I just need to see if it's in.
All right.
Just one thing on that. If I'm doing a program, do I have to build it as sub-projects within a single project, or can I do an enterprise view of these things across multiple projects?
Yeah, we could bring in multiple projects. So typically,
Good, so I don't have to build them in from the start.
yeah. So I've done that before. Like you export from Primavera, and I had 3 projects that came in together. I can bring them in as 3 projects. We identify them as being separate projects, but treat them as one and just suck them all in. So you can do it across a program or portfolio. Now, so I've got my typical risk events here as well too. Less than 100% probability, right? So these function truly as risk events. Everything on the right stays the same, right? That kind of modeling capability there. To the point of where we see value of this in an organization where maybe I want to make sure there's some sort of level of consistency in terms of evaluation of risk. I've got the ability to define or select some of these risks from a global risk list, right? That global risk list is actually defined over here. Today it's kind of this first tab. I think we might move it off in its little own separate place, but this is where I can define across my organization a list of kind of templates, if you will, right? It's a starting point. It's a, hey, did I think about that thing yet, right? We find many organizations are saying, there's things we're concerned about. We want the entire organization to at least be prompted to inspire some thought. Did they go through it? We can define them here with some kind of preliminary assessment of what we think the risk is to the organization, and then they're exposed over here for the project team to think about them, pull them in. They quantify them how they see it impacts the project, and then we maintain the link behind the scenes, which allows us to report on it later and say this global risk looks like this across your different projects.
Wes, is there a way that the register that you have can cross-reference, has a cross-reference field to whatever risk register the project has?
There's some things we're going to do to help that visually indicate like what some of those things are, and some of the additional reporting we're going to build out. So as of today, no, but we do see that coming along down the road.
Because to prevent that disconnect,
yeah,
the world the project manager lives in versus the modeling.
We think that, and also as we introduce kind of an RBS kind of wrapper around all of that as well too, that'll help kind of consolidate, and you can lump things together into categories, and you'll see like, oh yeah, these are really the same, and maybe a way to kind of link some of them together kind of after the fact as well. So yeah, we definitely heard that and see the value in that. All right, correlation, bear with me. We're gonna get a little techie for a second, and then we'll get back out because it comes up, and so I just want to touch on it briefly. So this is the ability, so one of the weaknesses we've seen and we've heard is that not being able to link risk to each other, right? Effectively what we're doing here is I'm applying some insight and knowing that saying, hey, I've captured this long list of risk. I know some of them are related. When this risk happens, this other thing always happens as well too. You can't do that, I don't think at all in other tools today, or not very easily. So what we did was we laid out a matrix. All of my risks are on both axes here, right? So we have a full matrix. I'm going to shrink this up to make it a little bit easier to kind of focus on a couple. What this allows us to do is to link some of these risks together. And so what you see is we're seeing now that the schedule impact of the engineering uncertainty is related to my construction uncertainty as well, right? So as I apply those uncertainty elements, I want them to generally move in the same direction and to have the same type of impact, right? Because they're related. If I've got engineering uncertainty, it's going to affect my construction uncertainty, right? So all it is an added element of realism to help kind of make the model a bit more robust. And for those that want to look about schedule integrity and the overall model integrity, this is a key input element that we want to make sure we included, right? So risk mapping. the view that I see here in my risk mapping is driven by the view that I see on my schedule tab, right? So I've got it organized by a WBS right now. If you want to view it by contractor, by some other activity code, by phase, by location, what have you, you'd go back to your schedule tab, you restructure, and it would reflect it here and across the rest of the project as well too, right? So you can kind of drive your view of how you want to look at that by your schedule tab. So let's talk about how we do some of this mapping. I'm going to pull some of these up so we can see at a higher level what's going on, right? So you can see here, I've got all of my risk are across the top, my activities are there, and you can see all these check boxes, right? So this represents that I've applied a risk somewhere down in here that I haven't applied it everywhere yet, right? But say for instance, I want to apply just this uncertainty for my wells against all of my well engineering and procurement, right? I'm applied at the summary level here, and it applies it to all of the activities down below, right? If you think back to how we defined that risk before, it's a risk factor, it's got a percentage range on it, and it's correlated by default. So if I'm thinking in my mind, I want -20 plus 150 on all of these activities, and that's how I defined it, I just got it. We handle that for you, right? So no more central limit theorem. I put -20 plus 50 on it. I'm going to get -20 plus 50 for that range of activities, right? So we've kind of killed that execution flaw in a lot of the other tools. Now, you can see here, right? Here's my engineering that I wanted to apply. It's not here because I can actually go and selectively apply it to just key activities down below, right? So regardless of whether or not I want to do a summary level top-down analysis or if I want to do a detailed bottoms-up analysis, I can model my risk at a summary level or at an activity level, and we handle all of the mapping and the correlation and things behind the scenes to make it work properly, right? So that, you know, the issues and the challenges that were there in the past are just not there anymore, right? No longer, if you want, you can build a summary schedule. You're not required to. We can handle a summary level schedule and do a summary level analysis. Now, so I'm going to go drill down into some of these activities, and so I pop this back out. So what we have also the ability to do, right? So I've got a series of my well activities. I've got multiple risks linked to those. If I want to, you know, review, what's the impact of those? I can drill in, see how I've modeled those against it. If you notice, I've got them modeled in series right now. So the impacts of each one of those risks will be added at the end of the other, right? So we're going to model them all in a linear fashion. If for some reason I think that they happen in parallel, I can model them in parallel as well too, right? So I can have two sets of risk impacting that activity as well, right? So I can control that little bit there. Any question about what we've done so far, right? We've brought in a schedule, we've defined our risk, we've defined some correlation between those risks, we've mapped them to activities, and so now we're kind of right in the heart of the analysis. We're going to go and run some analyses right now. Good so far? Uh-huh.
You're applying risks as a percentage of the original configuration. In PertMaster, if you try and do that to short duration tasks, you got a 2-day task, let's say, you know, that's embedded in a longer series of longer tasks, plus or minus 20% applied to 2 days has no impact.
Yeah.
Whereas the task right before it is a 20-day task, and plus or minus 20% is measurable and predictable. Is your underlying schedule in hours or days, or how do you handle percentages applied to a short duration?
You can define that option on import, right? So you can define at what level. We support all the way down to the minute level. So if you wanted to, for turnarounds and outages, you can go down to the minute.
Actual minutes or 15 minutes?
We're down to the minute, like true minutes, yeah, not the rounding minutes, yeah, quarter hours. So we do down to the minute level. So it depends on the import setting, how you would do that, and then how it applies post after that.
But if you did bring it in 1 day increments, your percentages applied would have a similar problem.
Yeah, it's just a limit of saying you're applying fractions of a day. So you've got, I'll check on actually, we maybe do something a little bit more. I need to check on how we do that because we keep track and we do obviously the multiplication all the way out now. We do multiple uncertainty factors. So I need to keep track of, do we keep track of the fraction so that we add it up over time? I can look into that.
Actually, something similar when we import a schedule in, if you have it days or something like that, do you need to, and you wanted it in minutes, do you have to change your P6 format to be able to allow it to import and manipulate the time in this one, or
no, so when you bring
scale up and down on time here, and the schedule still is good?
Yeah, so when we bring it in, part of one of the import options is what's the lowest duration you want to bring it in as, and so you can bring it in as hours or minutes. You set it at that point, and so it comes in, and then you can change your display view here inside the application.
That's what the PRA is not good about.
It's always a challenge.
This project file
Right.
here, you gotta
Yeah.
reset it up to get what you want.
How does it handle importing projects that have multiple calendars?
Well, I won't say we're full, no one's ever bulletproof, right? Because you're always kind of
Right.
chasing the last update. To that point, one level of detail lower is where you normally get around some of those issues, right? That's where we found. So normally if it's in days, I'll probably bring it in hours and display it in days, because then I get around any kind of these overlapping calendar issues, etc. So, but yeah. Okay. So I want risk analysis. I've got some options here. And again, this is where I can begin to think through, are there some scenarios that I want to explore? Right, so I've got a set of risks that I've defined, probably kind of that full comprehensive list of risks that the team's identified. I may want to run all of them just to kind of get an overall risk baseline and say, what's the worst case scenario, right? What's it look like if I run everything? And then I can come back and begin to work through a different set of scenarios and select different risks to look at. Right, so I'm going to go ahead, run the analysis. Kind of traditional, typical output, right? Here's the distribution graph we all know and love. And so we've got activities, our distribution graph, statistical information here on the far right. I can look at my finish dates. I can look at my costs. And again, my costs here are coming from, I've loaded it via Hammock activity. So I've got, again, depends on how you've done that. And I can also look at durations as well too, right? So whatever kind of metric you want to look at and investigate on, you can do that. So you've got your ability to look at these.
You've got finish date and not start date?
At the present, yes.
Okay. Implying that you will have start dates?
If it becomes important, right? So again, a philosophical approach, right? So one of the things we did was we stripped back to the bare minimum. And as we've talked with more people and more customers, we've kind of found out what things are near and dear and really used. To Nathan's point, conditional branching and some of those functionality, not used a lot, but when it's used, it's important, right? So we're going to deliver that, but it wasn't one of the initial things we came out with, because we're like, we're not really quite sure it's really used that much, right? PertMaster and the kind of the risk analysis world is like yay big. We're finding out people use about that much, right? We want to find out what that much is, make it really good, and then provide other insight and value around that, right? So that's kind of been our approach. One of the things that we brought back that we hope to get rid of is the report that Nathan talked about, which is this thing, which is often used but never understood, which is doing the sensitivity analysis and measuring correlation, right? So the number one question is, well, what does the 0.59 represent, right? And so there is some value, right? I trivialize it a little bit, but we think we've improved vastly on it, and I'll show you that in a second. But it does give you some insight into saying what are the things that will typically drive, from a risk perspective or from an activity perspective, drive my overall project, right? But invariably the question comes is, but what does the 59% mean? Is it 59% of the time? Is it 59% of the schedule delay? The cost? Like, give me more, right? So we said we can give you more. We designed something called schedule sensitivity by exclusion. And this will take a couple seconds to run, because what we're actually doing is rerunning the analysis multiple times, right? Right now I'm actually rerunning the analysis over and over again, each time extracting out one risk at a time, so I can isolate the individual impact of that risk from a schedule and cost perspective to my project, right? So I'm not running one analysis. I think I've got 25 risks in this risk register on a 300-400 activity schedule. You're seeing how well we run, right? We're fast. And I still haven't learned how to talk long enough to make it finish right when I want to end. Like, I'm trying to get the timing right, and I just can't do it.
While you're waiting, put in start dates.
Okay.
There are times when that is a critical thing that shows you where the impact of something's happening that you couldn't otherwise see.
Yeah, and to that end, right, so one of the other things we're looking at doing too is, right now we're showing all the activities all the time. What we've also found out too is there's probably a handful of activities that customers really want to focus on. So much in the same way on the analysis tab, I can select which risk I want to focus on. We're also going to give you the ability to select which activities you want to focus on as well. That'll help us speed up the analyses, speed up the results, and actually provide you more detail about less stuff, right? Ultimately, there's a limit in terms of computing power and all these kind of technical things that come with building an application and the quantity and the size of data that we deal with. We're limited by how much data we can collect and show at any given point in time. So the more we can focus on what's important and remove the noise, we're going to continue to do that. So that's an easy trade-off for us to make.
Could you not just add a milestone? It would be the same thing.
Yeah, so that's other ways to...
Yeah, once you know where to add it, but sometimes you don't see it until you look at start dates.
So what I want to highlight here, right? So I'm going to focus on just our risk baseline and our the top risk that we've identified, right? So effectively, I'm looking at none, and none is no risk were excluded, right? So this black line represents my risk baseline. That's the total spread with all of my risk included. I've now removed out the uncertainty around my fabrication. So here's a case where uncertainty is actually one of my top risks to my project. I couldn't see that if I had applied uncertainty as just a generic 3-point estimate against my activities at the activity level. We only get that insight because I've named it inside my risk register, right? And I can see that here. So I've got my schedule impact. I could also go and filter and view by my cost impact as well too, right? So if I want to look at which are the ones that drive more of my cost versus my schedule, so I've got a view to look at both of those, right? And I can change which level I want to look at. By default, instead of the P80, it's kind of a setting we set across the board here. But I could look at different levels as well too, right? I'm going to jump over. Let's see. Good. All right. So one of the other things that comes up is like, well, what's the impact of those risks on my critical paths? You know, I have a critical path, but we know that when we run a risk analysis, the critical path will change, right? Critical path becomes more dynamic because I've got a variety of risks that impact and change things. So what we're seeing here is while there's a lot of different critical paths, some of them happen very fractionally. We actually trace it out to a lower level of detail than we roll up. We round to the nearest 2 decimals here. So we can see that there really become 2 major critical paths with all of those risks included, right? But this will change as I go back and change which risks are included or not, and I can track how my critical path changes over time, right, based on which risk I include. So to the point of being able to say, what are my different critical paths? And let's go focus on just one of these now. So I want to say, well, this is other path that I'm not quite aware of. I can see here which activities are included because we track. Here's our criticality index, right? How often is that activity part of the critical path, right? So I can see it's only 30% of the time, but it's still significant, right? That thing changes. And there's also kind of a visual view here. If I look at, there's my duration spread of it. I can also scroll out and see those activities, and I can see which path they're part of, right? In this case, we've got long bars. This is a long schedule. If I go, there we go. That'll be a little better view. I can see here, you know, some of these activities really only emerge one time with certain types of risk, right? So it's some insight I can get, and I can go back now and say, let's look at some different scenarios and see what changes, which risks are driving that, right? What causes that critical path to change, and you can go back to your risk mapping and get that insight and pull that information out, right? So this is kind of my initial pass. I've got some key insights now, but now I want to kind of build up some of that story and report out like, well, what do I think might happen and how do I think these risks might impact my project schedule? So I can go back to my distribution graph, save it off to my comparison here, right? And maybe I think this is kind of my worst case scenario, right? And now I can go back to my analyze and I can say, well, what if I'm able to remove some of these other risks? And so I'll just pick some. So what if I'm able to, the uncertainty around my wells, if I can, startup failure is probably always there. Some of these partner delays, right? I can pick off a few of these and say, what if we're able to do some things with these, right? What if we're able to mitigate those risks or buy them down or do things differently? So I could, again, run through my same process, see how the project shifts, but I can also begin to do this now too, right? So maybe this kind of represents a most likely scenario. you know, or a best improvement as of today, right? As of today, we only think we can improve it this much, right? So we're pulling back 15 days, and I can go back again and say, well, all right, what's the best case we can do? Maybe there's a couple more uncertainty things we can eliminate some of that uncertainty and drive that out. And so we can begin to build this up, right? And what I also have the ability to do is set my reference point so that I actually kind of tell the story and say, hey, here's my envelope. Here's this spread, right? As of today, here's this kind of risk envelope that I'm working within these scenarios right now, right? I can name my scenarios. I can say, you know, as of today, we think we're going to fall somewhere in here based on what we think we're able to do with those risks, right? So, and again, I've just, for the sake of kind of time and streamlining it, did this for cost or for finish date, but I can do the same thing for cost and duration as well, right? So every time I run it, I could go back and say, also, you know, send over my cost as well too. And so I can now have, here's my scenario from a finish date perspective. We'll add start. Here's my scenario from a finish date perspective, but also my cost perspective, right? So now I can do an ROI of saying, this is what it gets me, right? Now, part of this process may be I have to go back and change my schedule, introduce different activities or new activities to represent you know, strategies to mitigate those risks. I can do that because I've got my schedule here, right? So I can go back, modify my schedule, and say, well, if we do those risks change in this way, rerun it, and I can capture it and, you know, capture that story here and report that out, right? All of these charts and graphs are able to be exported out, right? You can take the images and export them out right now. And so, again, you can see here, one thing I didn't point out earlier, these other tabs, you can see how simple the interface is in terms of the actions. Every tab really only has the actions needed to do to support that, what you're trying to do on that particular tab. Not rows and rows of buttons that you don't have to, you know, find your way through. It's, what are you going to do? I'm going to either, you know, work with this data, or I'm going to export it, right, or do something else with it. So we've really tried to keep it focused on, you know, the model, the process, the data, and allow you to drive that and have the team be focused on it. I would have no problem putting this in front of a team, right, because it's easy, it's not cluttered, they're not distracted by, oh, what does that button do? There's not a lot of extraneous buttons out there, right? So I've captured all this information, I've stored it, and what I'm able to do with it, I'm able to go back, right? And this is where we can get information like this, right? Because we're not file-based, because we're using an enterprise database behind the scenes, we can store that data, right? I can build this chart. I can track how are we doing over time because I'm doing it on a continual basis, right? I can pull out this quantification. This is just our sensitivity by exclusion, right? We're able to extract this information out and say, at the last run, here's the performance, here's the top risk, here's what we're doing, right? Here's the status as of today. And I can integrate this risk view, this risk element, into my overall project dashboard to give a much more comprehensive view of my project performance and what we're doing, right? I'm not just limited to my deterministic view. And this is what executives want to see, right? You know the work we're doing is valuable, but they want to see it at a higher level and not get caught up in percentages, et cetera, and all of that, right? So this is where we're going. This is what we're doing. This is Safran Risk. Welcome.
Some type of a scatter plot, cost and schedule.
Ah, you got me. All right, that's another one we try to leave behind. So truthfully, like, we're being candid, right? There are things we try, like, well, they've always been there, right? And part of this is, what are we used to versus what can we use to deliver value? Yes, it's coming. We're going to bring that forward again. Again, that's really the value there is the intersection of cost and schedule, because again, and it was great, Nathan highlighted again the value of it for us, is that intersection of cost and schedule to see how it changes. We were with Aerospace and Defense yesterday in DC. They do a lot in terms of plotting out their earned value forecasts versus their risk forecasts. And if those two intersect, we're okay. But if they've got a earned value forecast outside of the risk forecast, they're like, yeah, there's no way it can happen. So it's actually, the thoughts on how to use that football plot and the scatter plot have changed over time, which is refreshing. And so we're going to bring it forward and see if we can't drive some of that further insight as well too.
You mentioned several times that's an enterprise backend. Is it exclusively that way, or
nope.
Small projects, can you do it portable?
Yeah, we run it so you can run it as a local install. We do still install like a little small database behind it, right, to make it run. But you can also scale it up, run it on SQL or Oracle. Okay. So yeah, we do both, and you can switch between them.
Can you kind of give us an overview of what's ahead, what's your rollout, where are you today, and where's your development plan?
Is this beta?
Nope, this is live. You can get it today. I'm running the latest release. It's available on our website today. If you download a 30-day trial, you'll get this version.
Can you go to the next slide?
I think I got to jump a couple ahead. Sorry. I got to.
So there is a very robust development plan in place where we're taking. We didn't have that prepared here, but we have a multi-generation product plan. It's one of the differentiators between Safran and some of the other solutions that are out there. Is we do have a really robust plan, and I think you've seen some of the ease of use that we've leveraged from people who know the space really well. So they're precious about collecting information from you all. We're doing this circuit in Europe as well as obviously here in North America. And we have a bunch of other sessions going on where we're practicing the solution with risk experts to get their feedback. So the common thread that's been shared with us is this does not look like version 1, it looks like version 3. And the reason that is because we've brought in people who know the Portmaster like Wes, and they're developing the solution. We've also brought in risk experts like WTMC, IMS, David Hewlett, and many other that we've dealt with along the way to make sure that the solution is confirmed, that it works the way customers would want. The next step is to take it out there and deploy it with customers and get your feedback, and then incorporate your feedback into our multi-generation product plan. I would encourage you to download the 30-day risk trial. So we have version 1.1 that just came out this morning. You'll get that if you go to the website. Just go to safran.com, and on the front page there, you'll see the risk. Download the trial, you'll have access to it. You can use the same tool that Wes was using today. Play around with it in the project, P6, whatever. And then give us your feedback. Give us your thoughts and feedback, and we'll work with you. We'll set up an individual session with Wes to walk through any questions you might have. And at that point, I think it's probably would be most appropriate for us to sit down when you come back with your ideas for us to share with you. Here is third quarter release. Here's the fourth quarter release. If those are pertinent topics. Yeah. Any other questions? Did that help your question?
Yeah, but you touched on enterprise, and so, so I'm trying to figure, is there a standalone if you're like a laptop versus
Yeah, so you can install it as a standalone. Yeah, there's a standalone installation. When you install it, you have a choice. Do I want to install it as a standalone version? We'll install a database behind it, right, to help support it. The other option is I want to do a server-based install, and it says great. Much like you would even P6, right? It's like, where's the database? What version is it? And so you can do the centralized enterprise version of it as well, too, right? So you can actually run it either way.
Is that either or can I have a core people on a server-based and then half dozen analysts out in the field with a standalone laptop, but when they come back, it can merge up?
You can do both. You can do both.
And SAP?
SAP.
What's your SAP roadmap?
So it's a big roadmap.
What's your first step?
Yeah, so there's a couple things going on with SAP. So as you can imagine, we are a preferred partner with SAP because it helps them fill white space that they have in their solution. We do a lot of things with them. First, we're certified on HANA. At the end of this month, we're going to have certified integration. So HANA's for those of you who don't know, HANA's the underlying database that replaces Oracle or SQL. Inline memory, very robust solution. We're the only project management solution certified to operate on that. Secondarily, we have integration that's built out with the PM module, plant maintenance module, and the PS module, project systems module. So full STO round trip kind of capabilities. You bring work orders in, you have CapEx budgets you have in the PS module. You want to share all those through a proper scheduling solution. We integrate today with that. At the end of this month, we'll have certified integration. That's already been pre-approved. It's just a formality. This, Safran Risk, there's discussions going on right now. Wes is talking to their risk expert because they have a qualitative risk capability where they want to marry their qualitative with our quantitative capabilities. So we have so many different irons in the fire, if you will, but it's all moving in the right direction, and we're both working with customers together, which is more amazing than everything else I just said, especially when you work with SAP. it's all the leading indicators are going in the right direction.
But it's HANA forward. You're not going back to ECC or anything. It's just HANA.
No, it's not just HANA. We will operate on Oracle, SQL, and
All right, okay.
so
Yeah.
you have the option. We're
All
not
right.
forcing anybody to the HANA environment,
Okay.
but we are first to market to
With that,
operate on that in that environment. And we think we're first to market, even though there's many other integration solutions out there. We think we're first to market with a fully endorsed integration that SAP is actually out there promoting in all of their decks to say this is the right way forward to tie in project and risk management. Yeah. A lot of work going on with those guys at different levels.
How much of the kind of qualitative and description stuff can we capture in here as well? Now, this is intent is to have a set of risk registers that the project people will manage, and then just look at we import them here and we're just looking at the high level. But how much descriptions, qualitative items can we put in here, or is it just what we saw?
So just what you saw is we have like name and description, so you can do that. And again, we're kind of starting with the bare minimum and saying like, where do we have to go? It's pretty flexible in what you can capture. Like I originally had like risk IDs numbered in there, and I tried to, you actually put in that name field, you actually put a pretty descriptive name in there. And I think as we go and we add in like the RBS as well and kind of added like another level of structure around it, we're going to do some more flexibility with that.
Is there a user group? Be one?
There will be one. Yeah, we're generating critical mass right now. We're in that stage of where we're at from a company perspective. But we're going to do a lot of us, myself, 10 years, Primavera and Oracle, Jeff, 7, 8 years, same. Wes, you mentioned. So we know how to do this. We know how to do it right. We know how not to get off track and dilute it by focusing on other horizontal applications. And that's the reason why we came to this market, quite frankly. Is we saw that there was a miss for a fit-for-purpose solution for the project and asset-intensive markets. And you guys are being offered a lot of solutions that are more horizontal in approach, which Oracle should do. I mean, it's a type of company, and we think we can focus that in vertically. So we'll have customer advisory panels, we'll have a lot of the things that you have experienced in the past.
We've already been doing a lot of that. Our product development directions being driven by current customers in the asset space, oil and gas, and STO. A lot of our work's there. We just need to finalize it, which is to standardize it and have the standard meetings. But from a development and delivery perspective, it's 100% driven by customer needs, and 100% of our customers are asset-intensive customers like yourselves.
Any other questions? So I hope you took away. I thought, Nathan, thank you again for a great presentation. Wes, thank you for a great presentation. I hope you took away the ease of use and also the insight on what you were able to glean away from how we leverage past experiences. I think there's a lot in the solution. Even though there's a few things that, we always do. As software companies, we always have to be looking ahead and building out that multi-generation product plan. There's always going to be room for improvement. But I think and I hope what you took away is that we're pretty far along. The solution is a really good solution where it's at today. And it's because of the insight of working with people like yourself, working with the team that we've built. And we want to work with you collaboratively to take it forward and use it in real practice in the marketplace. So let us know how we can do that. Please take advantage of the 30-day trial. You don't have to go out to the website to get this. For all of you who attended today, we'll send you an email. It'll have a link to this. It'll have a link to Nathan's presentation, Wes's presentation. So we're happy that you attended, and you're welcome to share that as you like. If there's any other questions, we're going to stay around for another half an hour or so. There's a few of you who decided to stay on with us for the executive interview. We appreciate that. But other than that, I think we delivered on our 2 promises. We kept the focus. You guys did a great job of asking questions.
Okay, we did good.
And we delivered ahead of schedule. So we risk mitigated the heck out of this.
At the risk of any other older guys forgetting their readers like me, on the left, there is a Primavera replacement program, and frankly, a competitive replacement program we're running as well now. So as you go through the risk trial, if you like what you see, obviously if you have an existing investment, that makes it more challenging to make a switch. We understand that. We're definitely got a program in place to work with you to make it as capital neutral as possible. So keep that in mind as well.
Okay.
You can tell which guy's the sales guy.
Yeah.